A very warm welcome to IDFC First Bank presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 11. I'm Ritwika Gupta. As part of our industry-specific deep dive, we are focusing on India's education sector this month, featuring discussions with prominent figures from the industry. Tonight, we are in conversation with someone who doesn't need an introduction. He's an investor, author, entrepreneur, and someone who is extremely passionate about transforming India's education sector. Joining me is none other than Ronnie Screwvala, the chairperson and co-founder of upGrad, talking about the big shift in education, the significance of peer-to-peer learning, and also addressing the recent layoffs in India's EdTech sector. Thank you, Ronnie, for joining us today on Leaders of Tomorrow.
Thank you. Great having me here. I think I remember doing an earlier season, so let's hope there's some progress since then.
Absolutely. So this season, the theme is Ideas for New India. And I want to kick this off by actually asking your perspective on the 3-4 big ideas, or the trends, that you think will really transform the industry or have a far-reaching, impact on India's educational landscape. What can you tell us?
See, I think fundamentally, being now the largest democracy, also being 1.4 billion people, I think at the core of our challenge is there's 600 or 700 million people on one side and 600-700 people on the other side. Aspirations, which for me is a huge and important word, is something that gets connected when people feel they have a little bit more in terms of knowledge. Right. So two aspects. Firstly, there's a formal part of education, right? And I think it's different when you're looking at somebody who's a little bit more blessed and privileged, and then people who don't have easy access to that. So the good part and the challenging part about India is how do you actually make it into an effective area where most people have that, what you would call basic right. Sure. Today, the basic right of just being in school is not a tick mark anymore, because anyone and everyone needs the road to career path or to a job enhancement or to be an entrepreneur. Absolutely. Small entrepreneur, large entrepreneur, medium scale entrepreneur. So I think maybe 10 years back, 20 years back, you had a different outlook. But today I think job related and getting people at that very core has changed. Now there's a calendar event when you look at education. And I think what is maybe, I think we all expect there's always this concept that so many things have changed over the last 100 years and education hasn't changed.
Yeah.
There's good reason and there's bad reason. The good reason is for a formal part of your education, you do need a curriculum. Mm-hmm. The bad part is the augmented part, connecting you with life, reality, job enhancement, soft skills, interpersonal relationships, maturity at a school level at the 8th standard or at the 12th standard, sure, or in your early college, that the world has changed significantly. And how do we get there? And third, in a country like India, you'll always have faculty and teachers which will be in short supply, primarily because it's a phenomenal vocation, but we've not evangelized it. So it's not aspirational to be a teacher, even though I think it is, but not many people feel that way. We have to change an entire ecosystem where people feel this is an environment in which they can do that. Second, if you really want to set up schools and physical institutions, it's going to require hundreds of billions of dollars. And I'm not sure the capital allocation is there. And therefore, technology and brick and mortar coming together to change the education landscape, the pre and post graduation landscape, and then the skilling and job related landscape is really where I think the massive opportunity is. The market here is immense. Affordability and accessibility has to be kept in play.
Right. Speaking of technology and just picking up on what you said, tell me, what is the role and relevance of EdTech today? And what have been the biggest shifts that you have seen, especially over the last couple of years?
So EdTech is a nomenclature, firstly. I think we should all understand that, because EdTech started only because you needed a tech word to go out and raise funding. So everyone started calling it EdTech. So we should not get, because it's not just about technology. The approach of what has happened in the online space has as much to do with what I would call mentorship, coaching, and creating an environment in the online space of being as good as working in a classroom. That has changed the entire approach rather than just saying technology. Because it's not about a tablet, it's not about that, it's not about being remote. The key part today, I think what has happened overall in the word that you use, which is EdTech, is my belief is that peer-to-peer learning has for the first time arrived, not just here, but around the world. Right. And what do I mean by that? I think that's going to be transformative for the next 50 years of what learning, skilling, and education is going to be about. Now, normally in a classroom, it's not always a 1:30 or 1:60, but it is a professor, and then you have a little bit of participation. But today, peer-to-peer learning is one of the biggest breakthroughs that has happened because online and technologies come in. And I think the future of that is unlimited, because when you get to that level, you're actually creating an environment which is constant learning. And I think that's one of the biggest disruptions that's happened.
Ronnie, just bringing back the focus to upGrad, you founded the company in 2015. Tell me, what was the initial vision? And right now we're in 2023. How much of that vision has been accomplished? And also, upGrad is no longer an EdTech company. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think when we all co-founded upGrad, I think the clear opportunity and what we wanted to change in the landscape was to bring in the online element. Because there's a formal part of education, and we wanted to be in everything else that augmented that. Yeah. Second, we wanted to make formal education a little bit more accessible. So for example, the very fact that you can take online degrees today, whether it's undergrad or postgrad, your aspiration was to go to a university which you would never be able to go, or your parents would not be able to afford it, or didn't feel it was safe enough for you to go to university. Today, all barriers have been broken. Second, you're always restricted to capacity, and that's been broken. So I think in the formal education space, our vision was really to disrupt that space and make it much more affordable and accessible. Second, in the what I would call workforce or the B2B or the enterprise development, we always knew that whoever's coming in there, how job ready are they going to be every 2 to 3 years? And that was the second segment that we wanted to do that. And I think the third one that has emerged is really the element of where people are much more aspirational and want to travel the world, and therefore the element of what I would call study abroad. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying it in an advocative sense, because we don't need to have a brain drain, but today India doesn't have the challenge it had 10 years back of a brain drain. Even if people are going out, they want to come back and make a difference back here. Yeah. So I think the element of going out for exposure, learning competitiveness, learning a global approach, learning a very different standard, and coming back, I think is very good. So these were the sectors. Did we set out in 2015 with this broad vision? Absolutely. To make it affordable, accessible, and augmented learning? Absolutely. And then you sort of take that as you go forward. One of the things we learned is, while there's a lot we're doing in India, the ability for us to be able to impact in Asia and what we've done in Australia, or in very interesting markets, but very similar markets like Indonesia and Vietnam for us, have been equally good. Because now when you're in the online space, there isn't any restriction from a geography point of view. There isn't any real restriction from an ethnicity point of view, accent point of view. And even universities today are going much more global. So Indian universities are finding a very global perspective, because now students in Vietnam and the US are taking courses from here.
Right. Ronnie, since we're talking education today, I can't help but bring up some of the challenges the EdTech sector has been facing over the last couple of years, especially the last 1 year, business closures, layoffs. So I want to understand from your point of view, what went wrong in the past year or so, and what needs to be done, what sort of strategies need to be employed, for the sector's recovery?
So firstly, there is absolutely zero problem in the sector, because there is a reskilling revolution going around the world. India is at the epicenter of it and needs it from a point of view. The normal learner, the working professional, or the undergrad or the postgraduate, or somebody in a job for 5 years or 15 years, nothing has changed for them, and the opportunity is intact. Okay. If I just cut to the fact that a few businesses that got heavily funded, therefore needed to come back to earth, that should not reflect the entire market. And we should completely diversify between the fact that what is needed for this country, what is needed for the opportunity, what's the strength and what the evolution of that is, compared to the business cases of a few companies in the K-12 sector that would have over-raised money at zero cost of capital. Right. So I think to your two questions of why was there retrenchment? Yes, when you're when you're overcapitalized, when you get more money than what you need, when you have an aggressive board of directors of private equity who then pump you up even more, you are going to diversify into new sectors. And then suddenly when you have to start figuring out that no, profitability is your benchmark, you're going to have to shut those, what I would call walk on the wild side or down a yellow brick road, and you have to come back to earth and build that up. So actually what you've seen is the opportunity hasn't shrunk. The opportunity is growing. The market is out there. So you had a lot of wanton diversification that needed to be reined in. And that's the reflection of that. And second is, zero cost of capital led to valuations in one particular sector, which was only the K-12 sector, that were just unsustainable. I mean, even from any outsider's perspective, it looked foolish. And I think that is corrected. If you just take these two aspects out, the entire sector, the need is intact and growing rapidly.
It's time for a quick break here. A lot more coming up on reskilling and upskilling. Stay tuned. I know you touched on NEP a while back, but I would like you to elaborate, the national education policy. How do you think that has proved to be beneficial for the sector?
It's a long drawn out one. Look, the NEP came about after almost 70, 75 years, right?
Correct.
So for 70, 75 years was different. So I think we need to give it at least a decade to work. But the intent is very clear, sharp, and strong.
Welcome back. You're watching IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 11, and we are in conversation with Ronnie Screwvala, Chairperson and Co-Founder, upGrad. In this segment, we focus on the significance of reskilling and upskilling and what it takes to turn passion into profit. So moving on, I'm also keen to understand about the study abroad businesses that you have. Tell me, how are these initiatives helping propel India's skilled workforce, onto the global stage?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good one. See, again, keeping our affordability and accessibility vision, which was there from day one when we co-founded the company. Normally, study abroad becomes very aspirational. It's also, everyone would like to do that. I think 5 or 10 years back it was much more about, it was my permit to immigrate. Now it's no longer that. If you see 60% of the people that want to go there, want to go to study and come back. It's not a license to immigrate. Second, it needed to be a lot more affordable. And I think what we have been able to do with our positioning is that the first layer, you take the entire course of what you're doing online with us, with that university. So it cuts the entire, so in a 3-year course or in a 2-year course, you've half the entire input. And not, everyone looks at tuition fees, but there's boarding and lodging and everything else that goes with that, which is almost as equal to the cost of tuition fees. So there's an entire element that if you had a budget of $40,000 or $80,000, it's halved in your career of your son or your daughter going out to necessarily study. So number one, accessible. Number two, with that multiplicity of universities have happened, because then it's not about the capacity of what a university can take, because you're being able to do that in the first year online. So that has really been our core mission of what we want to do. Second, everyone had many aspirations of just Ivy schools and whatever else. Today, I think people are seeing the diversity of courses. So what you went for were 4 or 5 different elements. Today, that diversity that has come into the space, where you can go in for a specialized course. I know there are great institutes here on liberal arts, but what you want to do in that. So your segment and sector, including medicine, right? I mean, we need more doctors here. We're the most penetrated in terms of medical help and doctors and nurses. And there's no way our physical facilities here can actually go through that. And I think, therefore, you've seen the proliferation of being able to be affordable and go overseas, whether it's in medical or whether it's in a very, what you would call a niche sector. So I think affordability and accessibility and diversity of your courses. And it's not now a permit to immigrate because everyone wants to come back. But you've gone out for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, which is a combination of working in a very competitive, studying in a competitive environment, then working for 1 or 2 years in a competitive environment, and then coming back. I think that reserve and pool of people as they grow from the 500,000 or 1 million that used to happen a year to 4 million and 5 million a year, when you see that in the diaspora, what is going to happen over the next 5 years for the young people who are working, you'll see the benchmark, you'll see the dynamism in organizations, whether it's a startup or whether it's an established organization.
I know you touched on NEP a while back, but I would like you to elaborate, the national education policy. How do you think that has proved to be beneficial for the sector?
It's a long drawn out one. Look, the NEP came about after almost 70, 75 years, right?
Correct.
So for 70, 75 years it was different. So I think we need to give it at least a decade to work. But the intent is very clear, sharp, and strong, right? Which is enhance the technology, keep ourselves open-minded. Second, that the benchmarks and goals that we need to get from about 25% of our GRE ratios to almost a 50%. And therefore, that approach is a very clear mandate. And we know we are not going to be able to do that just by setting up infrastructure. And third, we work in rural India through our not-for-profit foundation. And I think part of the inspiration for upGrad came to me because of our Swadesh Foundation. And if you see there, aspirations are not very different in that 600, 700 million people in rural India than it is. The benchmark of what they think they would earn. Somebody here would say, I want a 10 lakh rupee job. Somebody there would say, I want to earn 1 lakh for my family. That benchmark can easily get leveled out. So I think that approach that is going to happen in rural India is also part of where I think the NEP will affect, to give equal right of people to be able to do that. And lastly, I think it's articulated itself so well that I do believe that, again, I would harp that one of the big changes we need to say is people need to get into this sector and look at it as aspirational. I'm talking about teachers, I'm talking about trainers, I'm talking about everybody who also wants to give back and skilling. So that whole fraternity is making it something which is, so I would say NEP has brought timelines, has brought openness, brought intent, a hard mandate in terms of where the government needs to go, and actually cleared the cobwebs of how we are going to use technology and online with everything else.
Sure. Ronnie, our show is also about entrepreneurship. And, as someone, you're a film producer, an entrepreneur, as someone who has set up multiple businesses. When you approach a new business opportunity, what are the criteria? What are the things you look at, especially when you decide, this is a project that you want to invest your time, your interest, and your money in? What are the things do you consider?
So I think it's different strokes for different people. And I think one of them is very clearly what you think you want to bring about to change. Most people actually make success of their businesses when there are two things. One is it comes from a need, either serendipitously or otherwise, but it comes from a certain sense of need. And you've got that rather than you heard it from 9 people, 20 people are in that. That herd mentality has got nobody anywhere. So the minute there's a hot sector and you want to pursue a hot sector, I think it's a recipe for disaster. Because anyway, the herd mentality will split out and only 2 will remain and 98 may fall by the wayside. The second, therefore, is it needs to be something where you feel you're going to be strong. And second is you're willing to stick it out. If you're willing to try something, then it's very tentative. Try and tentative are not the words for anyone to be able to go forward. And I think that is very, very critical. And last I would say is we put undue importance on capital. Everyone thinks without capital, I can't go forward. And actually the best ways and the biggest businesses and the most successful businesses have been built with very low capital, but with a very shrewd approach of how you're going to necessarily build there. So if you don't spoil yourself in the beginning, if you don't put that on the criterion, the chances are you're going to build a company which will outlast most others.
Right. Just an extension of your answer, then what advice would you have for first-time entrepreneurs, who are probably wanting to set up a business in the education sector? What are the things they need to consider, the prerequisites they need to consider before, diving into the deep waters?
So I think the whole education sector is wide open. I think you need to be clear that what you believe is your passion and you want to convert that into a business, there's a big translation on that. Yesterday I was talking to a very interesting group of people where they were looking at solving the problem that maths, for example, right? And anywhere and everywhere, even at our stage, there's always a fear of understanding maths. And they were trying to solve that problem. And I said, look, this sounds like a great passion project, but how are you going to build this into a business? So they came in and said, we want to make maths and music correlated, so it becomes a lot more acceptable to people. And I heard the whole idea out, but I was still, the key part that I'm bringing here just illustratively is how do you take a passion of that store and how do you scale that? Because you can get 100 students, you can get 1,000 students. After that, it's going to be a big challenge. So this is a sector that's going to offer a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit, but you need to figure out how you're going to have to solve a problem at scale. You can't not solve a problem at scale. Second, you'll have to solve a problem where you can't continue to lose money and that every learner has to be a profitable enterprise for you so you can plow back that money into the next part there. And I think without scale, and the third one is if you haven't kept affordability in mind and if you look at a certain benchmark, that will be a problem. And the last one I would say, don't give anything free because nothing is ever appreciated when you start a free model and you can never convert it to a pay model ever again.
Right. Well, those were some really insightful takeaways. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Thank you.
Lovely.
With that, it's a wrap on this episode of IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 11. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you and good night.